Hi guys, I'm really sorry I can't be with you today for this lesson. But what I've done is I've recorded this lesson and I'll be talking about this period of history. And then at certain points in the lesson, there'll be pause points where the teacher needs to pause the video and you guys will complete some tasks on what I think is actually a very interesting lesson. Okay, so it's really important that you're like really focused on what I'm saying because I'm not going to be able to give out any handouts or anything, obviously, and we're going to be using this format for at least all the lessons of this week. But I'm pretty sure it's going to work out okay. All right. So in this lesson, we're going to be looking at the naval war between 1793 to 1797, remembering that Britain is at war with France. And our key question is, how dominant was the Royal Navy between 1793 and 1797? And this idea of dominance is going to be a big theme for this lesson. So to start off with, I want you to create a mind map of what naval dominance would look like or involve. Okay, so if a navy is going to be a really dominant power, what would that look like and what would it involve? Okay, so for example, on my little mind map underneath, I've just put one example. The first thing that came to my head was that, well, if a navy is going to be dominant compared to their enemies, they're going to need a superior number of vessels, or just a normal way of saying that is they're going to have more ships. Okay. But there are lots of different aspects to having a dominant navy. So, what you're going to do now is list down as many as you can think of and try and be as detailed as possible. I'd like you to spend 5 minutes on this, okay? And I don't mind if you work with the people around you. So if the teacher could pause the video now for 5 minutes so you can complete that task in your notes. Okay, hopefully you've used those 5 minutes very productively and I've got a beautiful mind map of lots of different aspects of naval dominance. I'll show you what are some of the things that I wrote down. Here they are here. So some of the aspects of naval dominance that I wrote, I'll go through them from clockwise. So from able to defeat larger forces. Certainly, if you have a navy where even if you've got a small number of ships, but you're still able to defeat your enemy, that is definitely a sign of naval dominance. Another aspect is, of course, as I mentioned, having a superior number. That's going to help, of course. And then also having superior tactics. All right. Tactics is something that we're going to be looking at a lot. And tactics is all about how you use the resources that you have available to you. So if you have better tactics, or if you're able to use your resource in a much more effective way than your opponent, then you are definitely going to have naval dominance. Another aspect at the bottom that I've put is discipline. Okay, so discipline is not just great in school, it's also great in the Royal Navy. Remember last week we spoke about gun crews and why the British gun crews were so effective is because they're really disciplined. The crews, they listened to orders, they knew exactly what their jobs were, so discipline is definitely a big factor in that. And then linked to that is, of course, having excellent training. If your crews have excellent training, and remember the British officers also had excellent training, that is certainly an important ingredient of naval dominance. And then I've put a large budget and supplies. I mean, any effective organization is going to need, enough money to do the job, but also having enough supplies. So supplies aren't just, oh, have we got enough cannonballs? But, are your crews, are your sailors, have they got enough food and water to drink? Remember, you don't want them all getting scurvy. Having that effective supply and having enough budget is a really important part of being a dominant navy. The next aspect I wrote down was having very experienced officers, because at the end of the day, you can have the most effective sailors on the planet, but if the people who are giving them orders are rubbish, then you're not going to get very far. So having very experienced and highly trained officers is another really key ingredient to an effective and dominant navy. And then penultimately, rapid response. What do I mean by that? Well, in terms of rapid response, I mean in terms of like receiving information and being able to act on that information very quickly. So you may remember last week I spoke about how some of these battles involved like the Navy chasing other ships across hundreds of miles. And the only way you were able to do that effectively is if you are able to respond to information about where your enemy are very, very quickly. And then lastly, bit of a cheesy one, but it is actually a theme that comes up time and time again in this course, is bravery. Okay. You need to have officers and crews who are willing to face danger and make decisions that put them in the line of fire. And so, bravery, having people who have courage, is going to be a really, really important aspect of naval dominance. All right. So those are the ones that I've come up with. You might have some different ones. What I'd suggest doing now is if the teacher could pause the video for, I don't know, 3 minutes, and then if you don't have any of those on your mind map, can you please add them now? Okay, we are ready to move on now. And what we're going to do now is, first of all, you're going to need your textbooks. Okay. And the first thing you're going to do is you're going to read pages 6 to 9 of the textbook, which explains some of the key developments and key battles that took place between the years 1793 and 1797. Okay. For each of the key events that you read, you are going to explain how that event either did or did not display the dominance of the Royal Navy. All right. And to do that, you can use the criteria that we have just come up with on our mind maps to judge, did this event show that the Royal Navy were very, very dominant? Or did this actually show a lack of dominance or weakness in the Royal Navy? Okay, and all the events are in the box at the bottom of the screen. Those are the ones that you need to write about. Okay, I'll give you an example of how I did this first so you know how to go about it. So the first event that's on page 6 that you're going to read about is in Toulon. I don't know if anyone's heard of Toulon. It is a beautiful place in France. I'll read through this with you now, and then my answer is at the bottom, which I'll go through with you as well. So Toulon. In August 1793, Admiral Hood, who commanded the British Mediterranean Fleet, seized Toulon, the main French naval base in the Mediterranean. The arrival of a French army forced him to abandon the port in December. Before departing, he captured or destroyed a large number of French ships. Okay, so that is pretty good move, isn't it, by the Navy? They managed to capture the main French naval base in the Mediterranean. No small feat, but they did eventually get kicked out. And interestingly, the person in charge of the army who kicked them out was actually Napoleon before he became the dictator. But before they left, they managed to capture or destroy lots of the French ships. So I'm thinking pretty dominant move. Here's what I wrote down, and this is sort of like the style and the amount of writing that I would like you to do for each event. So this showed a significant level of naval dominance because the Royal Navy were able to capture the France's, that should say France's, main naval base in the Mediterranean. which would have caused high levels of disruption to the French war effort. Okay, so I'm just going to pause there. You can see, so I've immediately said whether I think this shows dominance, and I've explained why. Okay, because capturing the main naval base, that's going to cause a lot of disruption to the French war effort. I'll continue. It also showed high levels of dominance because although they were forced to abandon the port, they were still able to capture or destroy a large number of French ships, which would have helped to ensure that the Navy would have a superior number of ships at sea. Okay, so I'm going to pause there again. What I've done there is I've linked it to our criteria because remember, one of our criteria is having superior number of vessels or a superior number of ships. I'm going to continue. However, some may question how dominant the Royal Navy were due to the fact that they had to abandon the port. Okay, so that last sentence is quite important because in history, it's really important to look at both sides of the argument. All right, so I've explained the reasons why I think it shows they were dominant, but I've also chucked in a little argument about why people may suggest the British Navy showed that they weren't that dominant. And that's the style and the amount of writing that I'd like you to do for each of the key events. So it's over to you now. The instructions are on the board. You're going to read pages 6 to 9 of the textbook. And then for each of the key events that I've listed at the bottom in the big yellow box, I want you to explain how it did or did not display the dominance of the Royal Navy. I think this might take around 25 minutes. Okay, so if the teacher could pause the video now for 25 minutes, and then we'll go through this task together. Okay, hopefully you've used that 25 minutes very wisely. I'm sure you have, and completed those events. I'll go through each of them with you now. Okay, so glorious 1st of June, 1793. Here's what I wrote. So this showed naval dominance because the British were able to rapidly respond. Remember, that's one of our criteria, to the reports of the grain convoy and meet them in battle. It also displayed high levels of dominance because they were able to cause a significantly high number of casualties while sustaining few in comparison. Definitely dominant move, that one. On the other hand, Britain's naval dominance could be questioned because ultimately the grain ships were able to reach France. Okay, maybe I'm being a bit harsh there, but if you are a totally dominant navy, you would have totally destroyed that whole convoy, right? But I think maybe I'm being a bit harsh there. So that's the glorious 1st of June. Let's move on. So the developments between 1795 and 1796. The developments between 1795 and 1796 displayed a lack of British naval dominance because the British now had fewer ships than their enemies due to the Netherlands and Spain joining with France. So again, I've linked it to one of our criteria. Having superior numbers of ships is important, and now the British don't have it. Let's continue. Arguably, it also showed a lack of British naval dominance because the French were only forced to abandon their plans to land in Ireland due to the weather. Okay, so Britain, they were lucky, essentially. The weather saved them. The weather has saved Britain many, many times. If you think back to the Spanish Armada, we were very lucky then. Okay, so this is not showing British dominance. They just caught a lucky break in this instance. The Battle of Cape St. Vincent. Interested to know what you wrote here. Here's what I wrote. So the Battle of Cape St. Vincent was a significant display of naval dominance because the British were able to defeat a significantly larger naval force whilst capturing 4 ships and forcing them back to Cadiz. It also displayed British naval dominance because of the superior tactics and courage, remember courage, very important ingredient, displayed by the British officers such as Jarvis and Nelson. Okay, so a really, really dominant moment, this, defeating an enemy who had superior numbers, and the officers doing a fantastic job showing lots of courage. Okay, and then things take a dark turn, don't they? The Spithead mutiny. And remember, a mutiny is when people, typically in the military, decide to go against the orders of their officers. So this displayed a significant lack of naval dominance because the mutiny showed there were high levels of discontent amongst the regular sailors who faced low pay, bad treatment, and poor working conditions. Furthermore, it showed a significant lack of discipline in how the crews refused to obey orders, which could lead to defeat in battle situations. Because imagine you're in battle with the French and all of a sudden your crew refuse to accept your orders, you're going to be a goner. Okay? On the other hand, this event could have led to increased dominance in the future as the Navy agreed to raise wages and improve certain conditions for the regular sailors. It also showed that crews would not violently rebel despite the harsh conditions they worked in. I think I'm being a bit nice at the end there, to be honest, but I think overall this shows a big weakness in the Royal Navy in that things have got so bad that people are mutineering against their officers. And then the Nore Mutiny. This is where things get even worse for the Royal Navy. This was a major display of a lack of naval dominance, as it showed that there had been a complete collapse in discipline when the mutineers blocked the Thames. It also showed a lack of naval dominance because the North Sea fleet were no longer able to blockade the Dutch whilst the mutiny was taking place. I mean, you cannot call yourself a dominant naval power if a whole fleet of yours is now out of action because of a mutiny. Overall, it showed a lack of naval dominance because it showed that poor working conditions and a lack of discipline continued to overshadow the Royal Navy. So things not looking very dominant for the Royal Navy at this stage. And then this one, the Battle of Camperdown, this was a major display of naval dominance because despite having a similar sized fleet as the Dutch, they were able to almost completely destroy their opponents whilst capturing 11 enemy ships. It also provided a key morale boost for the nation. And actually, not just the nation, but most importantly, the sailors and officers of the Royal Navy. And maybe that's a criteria we should have added to our mind map, actually. A dominant navy is going to be one where morale is good. People are feeling confident and they're sure that actually, no matter who we face in battle, we can be victorious. And this definitely definitely adds to the naval dominance, certainly. So those are the key events of that period, and each shows like rising and falling levels of dominance. What I'd like you to do is spend a moment just on your own thinking about these two questions and write down your thoughts. So, question one, what was the greatest strength of the Royal Navy at this time? And number two, what was the greatest weakness of the Royal Navy at this time? So if the teacher could just pause the video for 1 minute while you, actually, no, that's a bit harsh, isn't it? 2 minutes to write down your responses to these questions, and then we'll come back together after those 2 minutes. So pause the video now. Okay, those 2 minutes are up. What I'd like you to do now is turn to the person next to you and discuss those two questions. And if you disagree, go for it, have a heated historical debate, but I'd like you to discuss those two questions now. If we could give two minutes to do that, so pause the video now and allow the students to talk to their partners. Okay, hopefully you've just had a lovely historical discussion. Not too heated, I hope. But here are my thoughts on this. So, what was the greatest strength of the Royal Navy at this time? Based on the information that we've just discussed, I think maybe the greatest strength of the Royal Navy at this time were their officers. Okay, because if you look at some of the key victories were came about as a result of like courageous and tactically sound decision making. I particularly think about that at the Battle of Cape St. Vincent, where Jarvis and Nelson were absolute legends, courageous, and they helped ensure that the enemy were totally defeated. And what was the greatest weakness of the Royal Navy at this time? Well, I'm sort of split with this one. I think, on the one hand, the greatest weakness is that they're facing a much superior force because they're facing Spain, France, and the Netherlands. So that means way more ships that they have to face. But also, I'm sort of torn with the lack of discipline because the mutinies, they are such a bad sign for naval dominance. If your troops are sort of rising up against you, that is going to cause significant problems. So I'm torn between the two on that one. It'd be very interesting to hear what your thoughts on that are as well. So there's just one more thing that I'd like you to do in this lesson, a nice easy task to finish off with. So I'd like you to use the information at the top of page 9 just to summarize why the outlook for Britain looked bleak at the end of 1797. And we'll be using that information at the beginning of the next lesson. So I think it depends on how much time you guys have in the lesson, but I think this should take no longer than 5 minutes. So if the teacher could pause the video now for 5 minutes so you can summarize the information on why the outlook for Britain looked bleak at the end of 1797. Okay, that brings us to the end of this lesson. Hopefully you haven't found this format too crazy because we're probably going to have to do this for the remainder of this week. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to send me an email. My initials are TBR. I'll be very happy to help. Have a great day, everybody.